It's just 15 people, Imran said, swirling her wine glass with a casual disinterest that felt like a practiced art. Her gaze was fixed on the catering brochure, not on me. She didn't have to look. She already knew the answer. The words weren't a question, but a statement of fact, a foregone conclusion. And of course, you'll host. The phrase landed between us with a quiet thud, so familiar it was almost a part of the room's furniture. It was the same unspoken expectation that had been showing up for years, slipping from a polite request into a non-negotiable demand. I watched her flip through the pages, her pen marking choices with confident red slashes, as if my home were a public venue and she, a demanding client. She muttered something about her mother's nut allergy, another detail I was meant to manage without protest, as if I were a hired event planner. Then she leaned back with a sigh, a theatrical gesture of finality. My brother's kids hate hotels, so we'll need the guest rooms. I took a long, deliberate sip of water, the coolness a stark contrast to the slow-burn building inside me. My hand was steady as I set the glass back on the coaster. I looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the familiar pressure to nod, to agree, to smile, and absorb the responsibility. Instead, a different emotion rose up, a quiet, perfect clarity. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Perfect. I'm going on a trip. You can handle it. Imran froze. The wine glass stopped mid-swirl, her fingers still curled around the stem. The half-open mouth, poised to deliver another demand, hung in the air. She looked at me as if I'd spoken in a language she had never heard before, the confident facade of entitlement crumbling just enough to reveal a flicker of genuine shock. I'm sorry. What? And she said finally, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. She wasn't used to not being agreed with. She was used to her words being the final period at the end of a sentence. I'll be gone the 22nd of December through New Year's Day, I said, my voice even, unhurried. So you and your 15 guests can do what you like. The silence that followed was thick, a sudden vacuum in a room that had always been filled with her words and my quiet compliance. It wasn't angry or hurt, just stunned, as if someone had dropped a tray in a quiet room and the sound had yet to register. I stood up, gently pushed in my chair, and began clearing the side plates. She didn't offer to help, she never did. But this time, she didn't even speak. I could feel her watching, trying to make sense of this new script, waiting for the apology, the softening, the punchline that always came. But there was no punchline. I rinsed the dishes, dried my hands on the towel, and the feeling that washed over me wasn't guilt, it was peace. The difference wasn't just in what I said, but in the fact that I finally, truly meant it. This moment of defiance, though small in action, was a powerful psychological break from a pattern of behavior many of us fall into the trap of people-pleasing. People-pleasing is a behavior driven by the desire to make others happy and avoid conflict, often at the expense of one's own well-being. It's an unsustainable cycle that leads to emotional and physical burnout. When we constantly say yes to avoid disappointing others, we inadvertently teach them that our time, our energy, and our resources are limitless and can be taken for granted. In the beginning, the requests might be small and filled with gratitude, but over time, they morph into an unspoken assumption of endless availability. We become a utility, a resource, rather than a person with our own needs and desires. This leads to a quiet but profound resentment that festers beneath the surface. A slow-burning fuse that inevitably leads to an emotional explosion or, in this case, a quiet departure. My decision to finally say no wasn't just a rejection of their Christmas plans. It was a reclamation of my own sense of self, a step back from a role I had been performing for years. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. I used to love Christmas. Back then, it was a season of soft-spoken, almost shy questions. I remember Imran calling 2 weeks in advance, her voice tentative, a gentle melody. Mama Ernesta, would it be all right if we brought dessert? Maybe stayed a night or two? She always used my first name, but with a respectful honorific, acknowledging the effort and the hospitality. Back then, Nolan would still offer to help unload the car, even if he grumbled a little while doing it. He'd kiss my cheek and say, "Smells like Christmas in here, Mom," before disappearing into the den to fix the fire or play with the kids. Those holidays weren't perfect. There was always some minor spill or forgotten ingredient, but they felt earned, a shared celebration where everyone contributed, even in small ways. The compliments weren't just for public consumption. They were quiet, genuine moments of connection. Then, slowly, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift began. The invitations to share a holiday morphed into unspoken expectations. The "would you mind" transformed into "you'll need to." The offers of help stopped arriving, but the guest list doubled. The compliments stayed public, but the work stayed mine. Last year, I roasted 2 meats, prepped 6 sides, and made 3 desserts because Imran didn't want to stress bake while managing her online orders. I babysat while they did last-minute shopping. I cleaned up while they drank spiced cider and watched Christmas movies. And afterward, they posted a glossy photo on social media. All smiles and matching flannel. The caption read, "Family time at Mom's." Not a single word about the woman behind the camera, behind the oven, behind the immense effort. I just smiled when they hugged me goodbye, nodding like the good mother I was supposed to be, the one who always absorbed the burden quietly. This phenomenon is a common trap in family dynamics, known as tradition creep. It's a slow, insidious process, where a mutually enjoyed ritual gradually becomes a one-sided obligation. What starts as a fun, shared activity slowly becomes a heavy burden carried by a single person, often the one who is least likely to complain. This is particularly common during holidays, which are deeply tied to ritual and memory. According to research from the Pew Research Center and various sociological studies on family labor, women are disproportionately likely to take on the bulk of unpaid domestic and emotional labor. This labor, while vital, is often invisible and taken for granted. In our society, a woman's ability to do it all is often celebrated, but the immense effort behind that performance is rarely acknowledged. The person performing this labor stops being seen as an individual with needs and limitations, and is instead viewed as an indispensable component of the tradition itself. The effort is no longer recognized. It's simply called tradition. This year, the group text came in mid-November. 15 people for Christmas. Thanks in advance, Ernesta. You're the best. There was no question mark, no pause to ask if I was well or tired or even interested. They assumed I'd host because I always did. And when someone does the work quietly enough, for a long enough time, people stop seeing it as effort. They just call it tradition. I didn't respond. I just closed the message, muted the thread, and opened a new browser tab. Flights, cabins, car rentals. I didn't have a destination yet, but I had made up my mind. I was no longer an invisible part of their tradition. And as I started tallying everything I'd done for them over the years, I couldn't stop. They forget that I can count too. They forget I can count too. Maybe not in spreadsheets or fancy budgeting apps like Imran uses, but in memory. Quiet, precise memory. My mental ledger was more accurate than any software, cataloging years of small, unreciprocated favors. I remembered the $4,800 I loaned them when their HVAC broke last spring. There was no contract, no interest, no deadline, just a handwritten check and a soft, "Take your time." I never mentioned it again, even as their social media filled with glossy photos of new patio furniture and weekend getaways. And I remembered the $1,200 cash I slipped into Nolan's coat pocket the week Imran opened her bakery just to help with flour and rent. I never got it back, and I never asked. And then there's the emotional currency, the babysitting. Dozens of hours, easily, watching 2 tired, teething toddlers while they recharged at wine tastings and friends' cabins. I fed them, bathed them, rocked them, and sang them to sleep while they posted boomerangs of sunsets and captioned their carefree moments with self-care weekend. They remember none of it because I never made them. I never said, "You owe me." And that, I now realize, is exactly where I went wrong. My kindness became an invisible labor, something they expected without ever having to acknowledge its value. This quiet, uncompensated effort is a form of emotional labor, a term coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild. It refers to the often invisible and exhausting work of managing feelings and emotions, both one's own and others. It includes everything from planning family gatherings to managing difficult conversations, anticipating needs, and, in my case, providing a constant source of support without ever receiving it in return. A 2017 study by the University of Toronto found that emotional labor is disproportionately performed by women, and because it is largely invisible, it leads to higher rates of stress and burnout. In my family, this labor had become so normalized that they couldn't even see it. It was simply the background hum of our lives, something they expected to be there, like electricity or running water. Last week, the illusion finally shattered. While discussing Christmas menu plans, Imran looked up from her phone and said, "Don't go overboard on food this year. Our budget's tight." Our budget. As if I were a line item in their financial plan, a part of their equation. As if I hadn't covered the turkey, the ham, the pies every single year. That sentence didn't bruise me. It clarified things with a cold, sharp precision. It was the final, undeniable truth. They wanted my house, my table, my labor, my warmth. But they didn't want me. Not my presence, not my comfort, not my opinion. They wanted what I could provide. Quietly and without thanks. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. Just me at my laptop with a cup of coffee and a blank search bar. Quiet Winter Cabins, Arizona. A few clicks, one reservation. The 22nd of December to the 1st of January. No guests, no list, just 10 days of air that wasn't filled with expectation. I closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and folded the receipt into a drawer. It was the first thing I'd bought for myself in years that didn't require justification. I didn't leave in secret. I just didn't offer a speech. The final act was one of quiet, methodical clarity, not anger. I printed their group message, the one with the casual assumption, and tucked it neatly between emojis and exclamation marks. 15 people for Christmas. Thanks in advance, Ernesa. You're the best. I folded it once and slipped it into a plain white card. No frills, no glitter, just a blank space for the truth. On the back, in steady handwriting, I wrote, "This home will be unoccupied from the 22nd of December to the 1st of January. Wishing you warmth, food, and joyful memories wherever you choose to gather, Ernesta." There was no sarcasm, no guilt, just facts. I then taped it to the side of the mailbox at the edge of the driveway. It was just high enough that Imran couldn't claim she missed it, yet low enough that Nolan would have to bend, to stoop a little, to read. I then went through my house, locking every door, unplugging the coffee maker, and setting the thermostat to away mode. I took one last walk through the rooms, not out of nostalgia, but out of a powerful sense of clarity. There would be no garland on the banister this year, no pine-scented candles. The folding chairs would stay in the basement, the extra linens packed away. The dining table was bare, the oven cold. I slid my suitcase into the trunk, and with one last glance toward the house that had hosted dozens of people, many of whom never thought to say thank you, I got in the car. The porch lights stayed off. Let them fumble for the gate code. Let them stand outside, wondering why the lights didn't flicker on. I turned the dial to a station that played classic soul, cracked the window an inch, and drove. The air no longer smelled like obligation. This deliberate and visible act of leaving a note is a powerful example of boundary setting through nonverbal communication. While it might seem passive-aggressive to some, it's often more effective than a verbal confrontation, especially with people who are skilled at dismissing or manipulating others' emotions. Research into communication and conflict resolution shows that a clear, physical act can be much more impactful than a lengthy explanation. A verbal argument can be met with denial, rationalization, or a shift of blame. A note taped to a mailbox, however, is a physical, undeniable truth. It prevents a back-and-forth debate and forces the recipient to confront the reality of the situation without the opportunity to immediately manipulate the narrative. The silence and the locked gate speak louder than any list of grievances ever could. The truth was printed, taped, and waiting for them. They didn't think I meant it. Not really. Not until they pulled up in their overpacked SUV, kids half asleep, trunks full of store-bought trays and overnight bags. Not until they saw the porch light off, the windows dark, the front gate locked. That's when the messages started. Nolan's name lit up my screen first. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" I imagined him standing there, frowning at his phone, already irritated. Then Emran's messages came, sharper, more demanding. "Gate's locked. We're here with food and kids. What's going on? Did you forget we were coming? Check your phone." But there was nothing left to explain. The card was a final, clear statement. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain. Then the tone of the messages shifted, faster, sharper. "This isn't funny. You're making a scene. This is selfish." That word again, selfish. After 3 decades of saying yes to everything, yes to cooking, yes to watching the kids, yes to staying late, yes to cleaning up after everyone left, yes to swallowing my words so peace could sit at the table they called this selfish. The word didn't pierce me. It only solidified my resolve. I picked up the phone, read the thread one last time, then placed it face down in the drawer of the nightstand. Outside the cabin, Pine trees stretched toward a sky that was starting to burn orange with the late afternoon sun. Somewhere nearby, a bird whistled. The world didn't care that I'd said no. It didn't call me selfish. It didn't expect me to serve. It just let me be. This is a classic reaction from people who feel entitled to another's labor. They use the word selfish as a weapon, a final attempt to manipulate the other person back into compliance. This emotional manipulation is a tactic often used by those who benefit from a lack of boundaries. They have grown so accustomed to their needs being met that any deviation from the established norm is seen not as a healthy boundary, but as a personal betrayal. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who exhibit high levels of entitlement are more likely to interpret a person's refusal to meet their demands as a hostile or selfish act rather than a valid expression of their own needs. Their inability to empathize with my exhaustion and my desire for peace forced them to rewrite the story in their minds, casting themselves as the victims. I didn't know where they ended up until Leona called. She lives across the street, the kind of neighbor who always notices when the trash bins aren't out or when the porch light hasn't been turned on in days. "They're over at Imran's brother's place," she said, her voice laced with amusement that she tried to soften. "Whole crew? Must have been a last-minute shift." She told me one of the kids had left their jacket on my lawn, so she'd walked it over and seen enough. I pictured it easily. A tight kitchen, one of those galley layouts where you can't open the fridge and the oven at the same time. Too many voices trying to take charge, not enough chairs, an unfamiliar stove with unreliable heat. Leona said Imran had tried to roast the turkey herself. It looked good on the outside, but was raw as a January lake inside. They ended up slicing around the center and calling it rustic. 3 adults slept on an air mattress that hissed itself flat by midnight. Someone forgot the ice. Another brought cold takeout no one touched. They argued over serving spoons, but not a single person mentioned me. They fabricated a story for public consumption, telling people I was sick, that I'd gotten overwhelmed, that I needed rest, as if rest was something they'd ever allowed me to have before. They didn't say I had booked a trip months ago. They didn't say I'd left a card in plain sight with every detail spelled out. No, they rewrote the story because the truth that I chose not to host, not to give, not to stretch myself thin for another year, was too inconvenient, too disruptive to their image of me. So they erased me from the story, but even without my name in the credits, they still couldn't make the day work. And Leona said, honestly, it didn't feel like Christmas at all. The Arizona air was dry and still, like the world had paused just enough to let me breathe for once. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, a porch, and a heater that clicked every hour, but it was more than enough. 1 chair that didn't creak, a bed that didn't carry anyone's weight but mine, a window that framed the morning like a painting. I made do with instant coffee and a mug from the welcome basket. I'd also picked up a pine-scented blanket at a gas station on the drive-in. It smelled like nostalgia and something new all at once. On Christmas morning, I walked to the diner just off the road. The waitress barely looked up when I ordered. She simply slid a paper plate across the counter with 1 warm cinnamon roll, still sticky and soft. I sat by the window and watched a hawk ride the wind above the red cliffs. It wasn't circling, just drifting. There were no screaming children, no pile of dishes, no questions about allergies or kitchen timers. I didn't miss the sound of chairs scraping the floor, the tension behind Imran's perfect hostess smile, or the moment when Nolan would glance at his phone during grace. I didn't miss anything. The afternoon brought a single buzz from my phone, just 1 text from Nolan. "You really left us hanging. That's not like you." I stared at the screen for a long time. He was right. It wasn't like me. Not the mother they were used to, not the woman who stayed back to refill plates and swallow her own exhaustion. But maybe that woman had been performing a role for far too long. The importance of this kind of solitude and self-reflection for recovering from burnout and people-pleasing cannot be overstated. When we are constantly surrounded by others' expectations and demands, it's impossible to hear our own inner voice. Creating physical and mental space allows for a crucial process of rediscovery. It's a time to reconnect with your true needs and desires, separate from the roles you've been conditioned to play. Psychologists often recommend digital detoxes and periods of quiet contemplation to help individuals process emotional fatigue and redefine their sense of self. I hadn't planned a new tradition or sought revenge. I had simply chosen quiet and found that it had been waiting for me all along. 2 weeks later, the phone rang again. It was Nolan. I let it ring twice before answering. I wasn't avoiding him. I just wasn't rushing anymore. His voice came warm at first, rehearsed. The kids missed you, you know. I almost let that get to me. But then he added lightly, with that half laugh he uses when he's about to deflect blame. Next time, just let us know earlier so we can plan around your mood. My mood? As if what I did booking a trip, stepping back, saying no wasn't a choice, but a flare-up, a hiccup, a lapse in emotional hygiene. He didn't see a boundary drawn in the sand. He saw something they had to manage. He didn't want understanding. He wanted comfort. He wanted me to feel bad enough to make it easier next time. I stayed quiet, not cold, not angry, just quiet. I'd spent too many years mistaking guilt for love. I didn't need to explain that what they called a mood was really me finally reclaiming my time. I'm glad the kids are well, I said simply. I hope they had a good Christmas. I could hear him trying to steer the call back toward ease, but I was already somewhere else, beyond the script, beyond the guilt. We hung up soon after, and I placed the phone on the windowsill. I didn't feel triumphant, just clear. And clarity, it turned out, was stronger than any apology. In January, I cleared the garage. Not in a flurry of anger or a burst of resentment, but with a quiet, methodical resolve, one box at a time. I opened each dusty bin, sifting through tangled tinsel, chipped ornaments, and broken strands of lights that hadn't worked in years. I kept the wooden angel Nolan made in second grade. It was one of the few things that still held a genuine, unburdened memory. Everything else was gone. The folding tables were donated. They had only ever been brought out for their parties, for their guests, for their comfort. The extra linens, unused and pristine, were packed and dropped off at a shelter on a quiet Tuesday morning. The bins of holiday decor were given to a church rummage sale. I didn't post about it or tell anyone because this wasn't an act for them. It was an act for me. It was about creating space, for air, for the quiet hum of a garage that no longer carried the weight of expectations. I wasn't angry, just done. Done waiting to be appreciated, done preserving things for people who only saw the value when I refused to use them. This act of decluttering is a powerful psychological tool. According to behavioral science and popular wellness movements, physically letting go of items tied to past obligations can be a critical step in emotional healing. Each donated box represented a piece of the emotional baggage I was shedding. It's a tangible way to break the cycle of attachment to a past that no longer serves you. The physical space I was creating in my garage was a mirror for the mental and emotional space I was making in my life. I was no longer folding napkins into fans and pretending that counted as love. I was simply creating a life that was my own. Weeks passed. Life moved on. Then one afternoon, while scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I saw it. A photo on Emran's social media feed. She was standing alone in their newly painted kitchen, arms crossed, with no smile. The caption read, "This year taught me not to rely on anyone." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I smiled. It was a knowing, quiet smile, because I had learned the exact same thing. And for once, I didn't feel the need to correct her version of the story. Let her have her narrative. She hadn't noticed that I hadn't invited them to Easter, hadn't reminded them about birthdays, hadn't followed up on Nolan's vague offer to come by sometime. They were too busy adjusting to their new reality, to the absence they didn't expect to last. But I wasn't waiting for them. I was planting herbs on the windowsill, repainting the guest room, and making morning coffee in silence. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. They had mistaken my reliability for obligation for so long that they had no idea how to function without it. Now, they would have to learn the difference. Easter came and went. I baked a small pie for myself, set the table with one plate, and ate in silence. It wasn't the lonely kind. It was the kind that comes after the noise has faded, and you realize how little of it was yours to begin with. Then Mother's Day. No call, no card, just a photo on social media. Nolan and Emran smiling on a rocky coastline in Maine, windswept and carefree. The caption read, "Much needed family reset." I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. By late summer, I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning. Real people, real laughter, no group texts with fake gratitude. We didn't talk about casseroles or complaints. We talked about elevation gains and good socks. In September, I booked another cabin, this one farther north, near a lake. Wood-burning stove, no Wi-Fi. I marked it on my calendar in red. Mine. Then November rolled in. One crisp morning, Nolan texted, "You're still coming for Christmas, right?" No greeting, no question mark at the beginning. Just the assumption wrapped in a soft expectation, like always. I read it once, then again, and typed simply, "No, but I hope it goes well." No explanation, no apology. There was nothing to explain and even less to regret. I didn't leave to punish them. I left because I finally realized they never really noticed me staying. I was the meal, the planning, the background music, and the clean towels, but not the guest, not the heart. And once you see that clearly, you don't go back to pretending. So I didn't. This Christmas, I'll be in a cabin again, with my coffee, my blanket, and a library book with someone else's scribbles in the margins. And maybe they'll post another picture. Maybe they'll say, "It wasn't the same this year." But I won't be watching, because when you stop performing, you start living. And I have a lot of living left to do.